Good afternoon. We're here with Gregg, curator, Shivers Museum Library, and our discussion today will be about Benjamin Franklin's Junto Club and how it relates to the Library Company of Philadelphia. So, Gregg, when Franklin arrived in Philadelphia, what kind of institutions did he find?
Well, he found it quite the dearth of any institutions, no libraries. He found a barren, illiterate area, and it inspired him. The printer coming in the early 1700s, he came as a printer's apprentice, but he felt the need to try to develop non-governmental institutions and some type of learning that the people of Philadelphia could flourish, hence the colonies in the country, future country would start to flourish.
And what type of educational opportunities existed?
No adult education, unfortunately no libraries. There were three libraries in Philadelphia, around 1731, belonging only to white men with a lot of money and a lot of power. And unfortunately, when you have white men with a lot of power, you have suppression of the rest of the electorate, so to speak, or the rest of the population. So, and quite in fact, they would not lend any of the books out. Franklin tried on occasion to lend them out to some of himself and some of his cohorts, and they had nothing to do with it. So, education is power, books are knowledge. They want to keep it all for themselves.
And could you explain the type of society of increased learning that Franklin set up?
Franklin had an idea of setting up because Franklin came from the quote leather apron class. He was a craftsman. So he wanted to set up, he wanted to help enlighten other craftsmen, similar cabinet makers, shoemakers, blacksmiths, and the like. So what he wanted to do was he wanted to educate them. Here, these people were very skilled and dexterously speaking, but they were very ignorant. And if he felt he could open their world up as being one of his own through the power of books, it would help them, with motivation, with courage, with talking to clients, with just presenting themselves better with the public. They can make a better living. So this was his first initial goal, was to set a little group up and kind of an experiment, and they called it the Junto Club.
And you touched on some of the goals of his organization. Can you expound on that?
Well, I think the goals of Franklin's early junto was increase your knowledge and help your community, help do things positive in your community. Every day do something positive and move yourself up a different rung in the ladder of your community. Don't sit at the bottom because you were a craftsman, an artisan. You deserve more than this. You're here to help build this city, this colony, this nation.
Excellent. And where did they meet, and what was the frequency of the meetings of this organization?
Well, the Junto started meeting in the city tavern. They would have meetings essentially or basically every Friday night or one of the members' homes. Generally speaking, it was only 10 to 12 members. It would fluctuate. And what Franklin asked them, anyone who would have books, to bring the books. And unfortunately, being in this type of class, one individual had 2 books, another had 10 books. So this was the variety and the quantity of books they had. Not all the books were good. I mean, one of the books would have been how to speak successful English, British English. So what they would do, they would put these books at the city tavern in a bookcase, and they came up with the idea, or Franklin came up with a set of rules that if anyone needed a book, they could borrow a book. They had to bring it back in a set period of time. So their motto became, knowledge is power, and it's achieved through books, through reading. So at times they would actually again meet at one of the members' houses, not necessarily the city tavern, all the time.
And so after a few years, what kind of results were produced by this organization?
Well, I think as a lot of civic-minded inventions, it kicked off rather well, and there was a multitude of people that would like to join, not just 12. There was just a plethora of individuals that would like to join the group. But I think Franklin was dealing with an experiment here, as he would in later life. He wanted to see how this small group would fare. And to his dismay, it fared very poorly because, as today and as back then, people weren't returning the books. So, and maybe one of the members who left his own book chose to take it back to read it or to, quote, bone up on something, he wouldn't bring the book back, so the other members wouldn't have a chance to get to that book. So returning of the books became a very difficult issue. It was just done on the volunteer basis, unfortunately. So.
I see. Well, one of the questions, why did the Junto Library fail? And I see you touched on that. And what was the result of its new form, rising from the ashes?
I think it was a real kick in the pants to Franklin. He was very frustrated. He felt this was a great idea. And in the whole liking, he felt there was a need for non-governmental volunteer associations. So this led Franklin to feel we need to have sustainability in this book club, so to speak, or this library that we're pursuing. So what he did was he made a subscription. Anyone who wanted to join any of these craftsmen beyond the junto, you had to be a working class craftsman, and there were hundreds. They had to put up 2 shillings, or 2 pounds. It was equivalent of 2 weeks of the wages of a craftsman, and it was a lot of money to them. But it was phenomenally accepted, and you had a plethora of people that joined up, and it worked very well. This went on for a couple years, and there would be some penalties built into this. Now, if you didn't return the books on time, a borrower owning a subscription could take 2, 3, 4 books out, but he couldn't supersede the 2 pounds that he put down in lieu of. And if he brought it late, there was a fee chart set up. The money would be taken out of a subscription deposit, and he would not get the money back. Then he would have to recharge his subscription to get it up to the 2 pounds that he could again come back and take books out. If in fact he never brought the book back, he shows up, he loses the book, he loses the whole week's wages or whole subscription wages, unfortunately for him. So this played part and parcel that it's good to do what you're supposed to do. You take somebody else's merchandise, property out, you return it. And it became rather successful. In about 2 years of working the bugs out of this, again, hashing around the city tavern and some houses, they actually got a location more down toward where the Franklin Institute is today. And that became the library of the Philadelphia Library Company as it is known today. But 2 years later, they opened this up to the public. So this was going to be the first community library that would turn into a lending library with subscriptions in the world. The first in the world occurred part and parcel through the Junto in Franklin. And so 2 years later, you would come in, and if you took a book out, you would have to put a deposit from a public individual, the value of 2 times the book. You'd leave the deposit at the front desk, you take the book. When you brought the book back, you got your deposit back. And it became very, very successful.
Interesting. Now, how old and why do you think the Philadelphia Library Company is still standing today?
Well, it's still standing because I think they stood by their steadfast rules. This would have been the first late fees developed by any library as far as we know in the world. So because they stood by, you must return your books, the merchandise. I think they only lost 0.5% of all the books in 283 years. So just phenomenal. But one thing could have put a wrench in that. When the British occupied Philadelphia in 1777, the books were moved on the 2nd floor of Carpenter's Hall, and not totally hidden, but they were put up there quite anonymously. That the British weren't really interested in looking for books, and the colonists were quite worried about the British occupation, so people weren't going up and down the stairs of Carpenter Hall to retrieve books. So they stayed safe there until after the Revolution.
Interesting. And how long did these not-for-profit libraries exist?
The not-for-profit, non-governmental associations such as this library existed the same way until about 1845, and then the first governmental library came in. So then you started having cities putting money into the budget to produce libraries, lending libraries, subscription libraries for the general public. So you had a great run from probably 1740s, early 1740s to 1845 of these non-governmental libraries working. But in the same token, this spawned other civic associations, which Franklin is famous for, the University of Pennsylvania and the fire company, just to name a few. Again, these were non-governmental based, and that's the important thing here. People helped in the colonies create their own government, their own civic organizations.
And why was the library termed the Library Company?
I think that was probably taken from many years, probably back into the mid to third quarter of the 17th century, from France. Over there, some of the first guilds popped up in the world of furniture, or actually in clocks in England, the Worshipful Company of Clockmakers. So the word company means back in Old English, or actually in the French lexicon, it means a guild, a not-for-profit association. And so again, before the government got involved in these things.
And what kind of books or holdings did Franklin's Library Company contain?
From the beginning, it was self-help books, how-to-do books, no novels, no fantasy, no fiction, none of the sort. It was strictly nuts and bolts, how to better yourself, how to better your position, how to better your art, your craft, in your field, how to relate to people, these kind of books. And they were hungry for them because they needed them. And it was a smashing success. There were people exponentially waiting to get into the Junto after this thing took off.
And we know Franklin was a printer, but where did the books come from that filled the library?
Well, Franklin was ingenious, industrious, and he, not only being a printer, but he had all his printer ties, his ties of a printer back in England and France and all up and down the East Coast. So he was well connected, and he started importing books. So all the books came from our mother imperial country, the UK, and that's where frankly, he vetted them all, and he brought them in, he purchased them. So Franklin, being industrious, he was making money off this to an extent, but perhaps that was well founded for what he did for us. So he was an importer. He was buying books, and when Franklin retired, I think it was in the 1770s, he retired as his part in the Philadelphia Library Company. He had a run of 200 years in Philadelphia, making Philadelphia the most educated and possibly the most cosmopolitan city in the world, behind Paris and London. So because of Franklin solely, he educated so many people with his library and the importation of books. So what a great thing he did.
And lastly, what is the mission of the library today, and how does it function, and to whom?
Today the library is a research library. Hardcore research materials from the beginning of our nation. The same books are sitting there. You can go there. People that go there want to do research of history, of how the Junto started. Also, they want to understand the culture of books and the culture of library. So when you go to the library, someone with white gloves is going to get the book, bring the book out, put it on the desk, and chances are you may be asked if you need to touch it. You're going to put gloves on to open the book up in front of you. So no books are relieved from the library. It's strictly a research library. And during the Continental Congress, the library turned into one of the best places to educate our politicians, our House and the Congress. So it was called the Library of the Congress. It was dubbed in the 1770s, and it was free to them. They did not have to pay to take a book out at that time. And sometimes it's still referred to the Library of Congress, the Philadelphia Library Company.
Interesting. Thank you so much for your time today, Gregg, and we appreciate all of the information.
And thanks for stopping by the Shivers Conservation Library.